Michael sat at his small kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. The moving boxes stacked against the wall were a looming reminder of the work ahead. He had managed to land a new job in the city, a decent position for someone who had been trying to find his footing after college. It wasn't his dream job, but it paid enough to cover rent in a modest one-bedroom apartment. Still, he couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. Moving was always stressful, and doing it alone only made it harder. Michael wasn't one to complain, but he had hoped his dad would offer to help. Ever since John remarried, things between them had shifted. It wasn't outright hostility or estrangement, but more of a growing distance. John had married a woman named Claire 2 years ago, a bright, cheerful woman who seemed to effortlessly command his attention. With her came a teenage daughter, Lily, who quickly became the apple of John's eye. Michael understood that families change, but it felt like his place in his father's life had grown smaller and smaller with each passing month. The ringtone of his phone broke through his thoughts. Glancing at the screen, he saw it was his dad. A flicker of relief washed over him. Maybe this was it. Maybe John was calling to say he'd be there this weekend to help with the move. Michael quickly picked up, trying to sound upbeat despite his exhaustion. "Hey, Dad," he said. "Hey, kiddo!" John's voice was light and cheerful, the same tone he always used when he was in a good mood. "How's it going?" Michael hesitated, unsure how to answer. "Pretty good, just, getting ready for the move. It's coming up fast." "That's great," John replied, his tone still bright but oddly detached. "Listen, I wanted to call and share some exciting news." Michael leaned back in his chair, confused but curious. "Oh? What's going on?" "Well," John began, "Claire and I just booked a trip to the Bahamas. We're leaving next week for 10 days. Can you believe it? It's been so long since we've had a proper vacation." Michael blinked, his grip tightening around the phone. The Bahamas? A vacation? He forced himself to respond casually. "Wow, that's nice. Sounds like a great trip." "It's going to be amazing," John continued, oblivious to the tension creeping into Michael's voice. "We've got this beautiful resort lined up, right on the beach, and Lily's so excited. It's her first time going somewhere like this. I figured we all deserved a little getaway." "Right," Michael said slowly. "All of you." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a brief moment Michael thought John might catch on to the unspoken meaning behind his words. But his father only laughed, the same carefree laugh that had once made Michael feel at ease, but now felt strangely distant. "Yeah, it'll be nice to get away from the daily grind," John said. "Anyway, how's the move coming along? Got everything sorted?" Michael hesitated, debating whether to say what he was really feeling. He wanted to tell his dad how much he'd been struggling, how stressful it was to do everything on his own. But something held him back. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the growing realization that John didn't see how much Michael needed him right now. "It's fine," Michael said finally. "I'm just trying to get it all done before the end of the month." "That's the spirit?" John said, his voice filled with an almost patronizing cheer. "You've always been good at handling stuff like this. I'm proud of you, kiddo." Michael swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. "Thanks, Dad." There was another pause, and Michael braced himself for what he hoped would come next. Surely his dad would offer to help, or at least ask if he needed anything. But instead, John said, "Well, I just wanted to share the good news about the trip. I'll send you some pictures once we're there. Wait till you see the ocean views." Michael felt a knot form in his stomach. He clenched his teeth, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Yeah, sounds great. Have a good time." "You bet we will," John replied, seemingly oblivious to the hurt in Michael's tone. "Take care, kiddo. Talk soon." The line went dead, leaving Michael staring at his phone in disbelief. For a moment, he just sat there, the silence of the room pressing in around him. The words from the call replayed in his head, each one stinging more than the last. We all deserved a little getaway. It was such a small comment, but it carried so much weight. It wasn't just about the vacation, it was about what it represented. John hadn't even thought to include him. There had been no invitation, no consideration of how Michael might feel. It was as if he were no longer part of the family, just an afterthought in his father's new life. Michael's thoughts spiraled as he stared at the moving boxes. He thought about all the times his dad had been there for him when he was younger, teaching him how to ride a bike, cheering him on at his basketball games, helping him study for exams. They had been a team, just the two of them, ever since his mom had left when he was a kid. But now it felt like that bond had been replaced, like John had built a new team without him. The bitterness crept in slowly, mingling with the sadness until it became something heavier. Michael wanted to shake it off, to tell himself it didn't matter. But deep down, he knew it did. He stood up and paced the room, trying to clear his head. His eyes landed on one of the moving boxes labeled Photos. Inside were old family pictures, snapshots of happier times. He thought about digging through it, searching for some proof that things hadn't always been this way. But he stopped himself. What good would it do? Instead, he sat back down at the table and picked up his coffee, now lukewarm. He stared at the dark liquid, his mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. Was this just the way things were going to be now? Was he always going to be on the outside looking in? As the hours passed, Michael tried to focus on packing, but the conversation with his dad lingered in the back of his mind. No matter how much he tried to push it aside, the hurt wouldn't go away. And as he taped up the last box for the night, he made a silent vow to himself. Things couldn't stay like this. If his dad couldn't see what was happening, Michael would have to find a way to make him understand. The morning of Michael's move arrived with a gray sky hanging heavy above the city. The forecast promised rain by the afternoon, but he was determined to get everything done before the weather turned. Standing in his nearly empty apartment, Michael took a deep breath and looked at the clutter of boxes stacked near the door. Each one bore a label scrawled in black marker. Kitchen, clothes, books, miscellaneous, his whole life packed into neat little squares, ready to be transported to his new place. Michael had asked a couple of friends for help, but their responses had been polite apologies laced with excuses. One had a family obligation, another had work, and the rest simply hadn't replied. He didn't blame them. It wasn't their responsibility to help him move. Still, it stung. Everyone seemed to have someone to lean on. Except for him. The thought brought him back to the phone call with his dad a few days earlier. He had replayed that conversation in his head so many times since, each time feeling the same bitterness creeping in. It wasn't just that his dad wasn't helping. It was the sheer lack of awareness, the casual way he'd dismissed Michael's struggles without even realizing it. The vacation to the Bahamas felt like a slap in the face. Michael shook his head, trying to push the thoughts away. Focus on the task at hand, he told himself. He grabbed a box of kitchen supplies and carried it out to the rented moving van parked on the street below. The stairs in his old building were steep and narrow, and by the time he reached the bottom, his arms were burning. He shoved the box into the back of the van and turned to head back up for another load. By the third trip, Michael was drenched in sweat, his muscles aching from the effort. He passed a couple of neighbors in the hallway, an older woman walking her tiny dog and a young couple carrying groceries. Both offered polite smiles but didn't stop to chat. Michael wondered if they even knew he was leaving. He doubted it. He had lived in this building for 2 years, but it had never felt like home. Back in his apartment, he paused to catch his breath, leaning against the doorframe. His phone buzzed on the countertop, and for a brief, hopeful moment, he thought it might be his dad calling to check in. But when he picked it up, he saw it was a notification from social media. His heart sank as he opened the app and saw a photo at the top of his feed. A picture of his dad, Claire, and Lily at the airport. All smiles. The caption read, "Off to paradise. Can't wait to feel the sand between our toes." Michael stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. He could feel the anger bubbling up again, the same anger that had been simmering since their phone call. It wasn't just about the vacation, it was about what it represented. His dad had moved on, built a new family, and Michael had been left behind. With a frustrated sigh, he tossed the phone onto the couch and went back to work. Box after box, trip after trip, until the van was nearly full. By then, the rain had started. A light drizzle at first, but quickly turning into a steady downpour. Michael pulled the hood of his sweatshirt over his head and kept going, ignoring the water soaking through his clothes. As he carried the last box down the stairs, he slipped on the wet concrete outside and nearly dropped it. Cursing under his breath, he shoved the box into the van and slammed the door shut. He stood there for a moment, rain streaming down his face, and let out a heavy breath. His hands were trembling. Whether from the cold or the frustration, he wasn't sure. Driving to the new apartment was slow and tedious. The rain made visibility poor, and the streets were slick with water. Michael gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white, as he navigated through the city. His mind wandered as he drove, replaying old memories of his dad. He thought about the camping trips they used to take, the long car rides filled with music and laughter. Back then, it had felt like they were a team, just the two of them against the world. But now that bond felt like a distant memory, something that had been eroded by time and circumstance. When Michael finally arrived at his new apartment, he was soaked to the bone and utterly exhausted. He parked the van in front of the building and sat there for a moment, staring out at the rain. He didn't have the energy to start unloading, but he knew he couldn't sit there forever. With a resigned sigh, he climbed out of the van and began hauling boxes in. The new apartment was small but clean, with hardwood floors and a single window overlooking the street. Michael stacked the boxes in the corner and surveyed the space. It wasn't much, but it was his. He told himself he should feel proud. He had made this move on his own, without anyone's help. But instead, all he felt was an overwhelming sense of loneliness. As he sat on the floor, leaning against one of the boxes, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from his dad. "Hope the move's going well. Don't work too hard." Michael stared at the screen, his chest tightening. The message was so casual, so detached, as if John had no idea how much Michael was struggling. He wanted to reply, to tell his dad exactly how he felt, but he couldn't find the words. Instead, he set the phone down and leaned his head back against the wall, closing his eyes. The sound of rain tapping against the window filled the room, a steady rhythm that matched the heaviness in Michael's chest. He thought about all the times he had been there for his dad, helping him after the divorce, supporting him through the awkwardness of dating again. And now, when Michael needed him most, his dad was thousands of miles away, sipping cocktails on a beach. Michael opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. He had always prided himself on being independent, on handling things on his own. But in this moment, he couldn't help but wish for someone to lean on, someone who would see him, really see him, and offer more than just empty words. The day ended with Michael collapsing onto the air mattress he had set up in the corner of the room. His body ached from the physical labor, but it was the emotional weight that truly exhausted him. As he lay there in the dark, listening to the rain outside, he made a silent promise to himself. He wouldn't let this become his new normal. He deserved better than this. Better than being an afterthought in his own family. The days following the move passed in a haze for Michael. The new apartment was far from homey, filled with half-unpacked boxes and the faint smell of fresh paint. Each morning he woke up on his sagging air mattress, surrounded by chaos, and told himself he would start unpacking. But by the end of the day, the boxes remained untouched. The physical exhaustion from the move had worn off, but the emotional weight lingered like a storm cloud that refused to clear. Michael hadn't spoken to his dad since the brief text he'd received on moving day. The message, "Hope the move's going well, don't work too hard," had been both infuriating and heartbreaking in its simplicity. It wasn't just the lack of effort or concern that bothered him. It was the growing realization that his dad genuinely didn't seem to understand how much his absence hurt. One evening, after another long day of avoiding unpacking and scrolling aimlessly through his phone, Michael decided he couldn't keep everything bottled up anymore. The words had been simmering in his mind for days, forming and reforming into sentences he wasn't sure he'd ever say. Finally, he sat down at his desk, opened his laptop, and began typing. The email started simply, "Dad, I need to tell you something that's been on my mind." From there, the words spilled out in a rush. Michael wrote about the move, about how overwhelming it had been to do everything alone. He described the phone call where John had announced his vacation plans, how it had felt like a punch to the gut. He didn't hold back, detailing the growing distance he felt between them, the sense that he had been replaced in his father's life by Claire and Lily. "I don't begrudge you happiness," he wrote. "I'm glad you found someone who makes you happy. But it feels like in building a new family you forgot about the one you already had. I didn't expect you to drop everything for me, but I thought I mattered enough for you to at least offer to help. Instead, I had to carry this entire move on my own while you were off planning a vacation." By the time he finished, Michael's hands were trembling. He read the email over twice, debating whether to send it. A part of him worried it was too harsh, that it would make things worse, but another part of him, the part that had been ignored for too long, knew he needed to say it. If he didn't, the resentment would only grow. He clicked send before he could second-guess himself again. The next day, Michael checked his email obsessively, waiting for a reply. Morning turned to afternoon, then evening, and still nothing. Each passing hour felt like a confirmation of his worst fears, that his dad either didn't care enough to respond or didn't know what to say. Finally, late that night, an email from John arrived. Michael's heart raced as he opened it, scanning the words with a mix of hope and dread. "Michael, I'm sorry to hear you've been feeling this way. I never meant to make you feel like you're not important to me. You've always been my son, and that will never change." For a brief moment, Michael felt a flicker of relief, but as he read on, that relief turned to frustration. "That being said, I think you're being a little unfair. I didn't realize you were struggling so much with the move. You should have told me. I would have been happy to help if I'd known. And as for the vacation, it wasn't meant to exclude you. It's just something we planned as a family. You're an adult now, Michael. I can't always be there to hold your hand." Michael stared at the screen, his chest tightening. The words felt like a slap in the face, a dismissal of everything he had tried to express. His dad wasn't apologizing, he was deflecting, turning the blame back onto Michael for not speaking up sooner. He closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. How could John not see what he was doing? How could he write "you're an adult now" as if it justified everything? Michael had always prided himself on his independence, but that didn't mean he didn't need his father. And the worst part was, John's reply made it clear that he didn't even understand why Michael was upset. The next few days were filled with a heavy silence between them. Michael didn't respond to the email. He told himself he needed time to process, but deep down he knew he was waiting for John to reach out again, to realize how inadequate his response had been. But the phone never rang. Instead, Michael found himself pulling away. He stopped checking in with his dad, stopped liking his posts on social media, stopped replying to the occasional texts John sent. At first, it felt petty, like a small act of rebellion. But as the days turned into weeks, it began to feel like self-preservation. One evening, as Michael scrolled through social media, he came across another post from his dad. It was a picture of Claire and Lily at a fancy restaurant with the caption, "Family dinner night. Couldn't be prouder of my girls." Michael stared at the photo, his stomach churning. The word family felt like a knife twisting in his chest. He wanted to scream, to comment something snarky, to do anything that would make his dad understand how much those words hurt. but instead he closed the app and set his phone aside. The silence between them continued, growing wider with each passing day. Michael found himself thinking back to the email he had sent, wondering if he had said too much or not enough. But no matter how many times he replayed the situation in his head, he kept coming back to the same conclusion. This wasn't just about the email, or the move, or the vacation. It was about a pattern, a shift in their relationship that had been happening for years. And now, as Michael sat alone in his apartment, surrounded by unpacked boxes and unanswered questions, he couldn't help but wonder if things would ever go back to the way they used to be. A month passed in strained silence between Michael and his father. The email exchange had left an invisible chasm between them, one that neither seemed ready or willing to cross. Michael tried to focus on settling into his new apartment, throwing himself into work and making small efforts to rebuild his social life. Yet, no matter how busy he kept himself, the unresolved tension with his father lingered, like a dull ache in the background of his days. It wasn't just about the move anymore. It was about all the years of quiet neglect that had piled up, one small hurt at a time, until they formed a mountain too large to ignore. Michael didn't want to resent his father, but the bitterness was becoming harder to suppress. One rainy Friday evening, after a particularly grueling week at work, Michael found himself scrolling through his phone again. His father had posted another set of photos from the Bahamas trip, this time featuring Claire and Lily snorkeling in crystal-clear water. The caption read, "Unforgettable family memories. Can't wait for the next adventure." Michael stared at the screen, his heart pounding. Something inside him snapped. This wasn't just about feeling left out anymore. It was about the message those photos and captions sent, intentional or not. His father was building a life that Michael no longer seemed to be a part of, and the realization hit him like a tidal wave. Without thinking, Michael grabbed his phone and dialed his dad's number. He hadn't called John since before the move, and as the line rang, he felt a surge of both dread and determination. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, John answered. "Michael, hey, it's good to hear from you," John said, his tone warm but casual, as if nothing had happened. "Hi, Dad," Michael replied, his voice tight. He could feel the emotions bubbling just below the surface. "Do you have a minute to talk?" "Of course," John said. "What's on your mind?" Michael hesitated, his grip tightening on the phone. He hadn't planned out what he was going to say, but the words came spilling out anyway. "I can't keep doing this," he said, his voice shaking. "I can't keep pretending everything's fine between us when it's not." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What do you mean?" John asked, his tone cautious. "You don't get it, do you?" Michael said, his frustration boiling over. "I feel like I've been pushed out of your life, like I don't even matter to you anymore. Ever since you married Claire, it's like you've replaced me with her and Lily. And the move... Dad, I needed you, and you weren't there. You didn't even offer to help. Instead, you went on a vacation and posted about family memories, while I was struggling to do everything on my own." "Michael, that's not fair," John said, his voice defensive. "I told you... I didn't know you needed help. You're an adult now. I assumed you had it handled." "That's the problem," Michael shot back. "You keep using the fact that I'm an adult as an excuse to check out of my life. Yes, I'm an adult. But that doesn't mean I don't need my dad. And it doesn't mean it doesn't hurt to feel like I've been replaced." "Replaced?" John repeated, his voice rising. "Michael, you're my son. No one could ever replace you. I don't know where you're getting this idea." Michael laughed bitterly. "I'm getting it from your actions, Dad, from the way you prioritize them over me, from the way you didn't even think to include me in your vacation plans, from the way you talk about family like it's just you, Claire, and Lily. Do you even realize how that feels?" John was silent for a moment, and Michael could hear him exhale deeply on the other end of the line. "Michael," he said finally, his tone softer, "I had no idea you were feeling this way. I never meant to make you feel excluded or unimportant. I thought I was giving you space, letting you live your life without me hovering over you. Maybe I misjudged that." "You did," Michael said, his voice still tense but quieter now. "I don't need you to hover. I just need to feel like I matter to you, like I'm still part of your life, because right now, it doesn't feel that way." Another long pause. When John spoke again, his voice was heavy with emotion. "You're right. I've been so focused on building my new life with Claire and Lily that I didn't realize I was neglecting you. That was never my intention, but intentions don't excuse the impact. I'm sorry, Michael. I'm so sorry for making you feel this way." Michael felt a lump rise in his throat. He had waited so long to hear those words, but now that they had been said, they didn't magically erase the pain. Still, they were a start. "I just want us to have a real relationship again," Michael said, his voice breaking. "I miss the way things used to be. I miss feeling like I can count on you." "You can count on me," John said firmly. "I know I haven't shown that lately, but I'm going to do better. I promise you, Michael, I'll do better." They talked for over an hour that night, unpacking years of misunderstandings and unspoken grievances. It wasn't easy. There were tears and moments of anger, but there was also a sense of relief, a feeling that they were finally getting to the heart of the matter. By the time they hung up, Michael felt lighter than he had in weeks. The conversation hadn't solved everything, but it had opened the door to healing. For the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful about their relationship. In the weeks that followed, John made good on his promise. He called more often, not just to check in, but to genuinely listen. He even drove up one weekend to help Michael finish unpacking, bringing along a housewarming gift, a framed photo of the two of them from one of their old camping trips. Michael kept the photo on his desk, a reminder of the bond they were working to rebuild. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of tension and awkwardness, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, Michael felt like he wasn't alone. As he stood in his now fully unpacked apartment surrounded by signs of his new life, Michael realized something important. Family wasn't about perfection or always getting it right. It was about showing up, even when it was hard. And for all their flaws and missteps, he knew his dad was finally showing up. That was enough for now.